And welcome back to One More Word Pod. Again, you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube for your listening pleasure. We thank you for taking the time. I'm Marvin Williams, not that Marvin Williams, but the other Marvin Williams. And my partner in crime, though we're only speaking figuratively, not literally, so no warrants are needed. Mr. Matthew Allen, which is Octavius Orenthal, Gerard Ryan, Shook the third, the 5.5, and the third, and the fifth.
0.732. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second episode of One More Word Pod, or just One More Word. On social media, you can follow us at One More Word Pod. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment. The more comments you leave, the higher in the aggregate we go. And also the YouTube version, leave comments below. Be sure to ring that bell and hit the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up. All that other YouTube, Instagrams, razzmatazz. Marvin, our first episode is in the books. We are in episode 2. That first episode was kind of a get to know Matt and Marvin thing. Now, there might be people who have been listening to us all the way back in the WKRB days, the Sports Radio America days, where we will not talk about that. That's an off-air conversation me and Marvin have to have. And the Hive Mind Radio days back when it was kind of like Howard Stern in 84 at WNBC. We had Renice, we had Alex Soberman, we had Stephen James, we had Stephanie Sotilli. You had to go do adult things, so I manned the ship for about a year. This is the unplugged version of
the
GSI.
Unplugged version. I love it. Absolutely. And you know what? Most people who listen to us back then are probably out of federal prison by now, so that's pretty cool. So, speaking of federal prison, when we celebrate the greatest achievements in history, it's interesting how the goalposts always move. So, who doesn't celebrate the very first cats in flight, like the very first guys to actually get a machine off the ground to fly, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? Everybody knows? There's Bueller, anybody?
I would believe that would be Orville and Wilbur Wright.
You would think that, but on August 14th, 1901, 2 years before they did it, Gustav Whitehead did it in Germany.
Didn't he play for the Packers?
He was a free safety, yeah. So why are we talking about Gustav Whitehead on a sports show as opposed to the White brothers or even, I don't know, sports? Well, it's one of those things of how it's amazing how history, when we look at how things play out, how the goalposts for achievement seem to move, and football seems to be the sport where that happens more so than anyone. Okay, so real quick backstory. Gustav Whitehead, unfunded, whatever, he was actually into solar physics, and he wanted to get the idea of powered flight. A lot of people were thinking about it at the time. The United States, the Department of War, put out a big grant thinking about we might be preparing for being able to do battles in the air. And even though he wasn't connected to that, unlike another person who was, he wasn't connected to that, he still wanted to get it done because he was one of those thinkers, he was one of those doers. So it's a really cool moment that happened that no one really knew about because we don't talk about him. Well, we celebrate the Wright brothers, and the Wright brothers were two guys who owned a bicycle shop, who taught these other people who had the same sort of mentality they had. This will be fun. Let's go do this. And they would go down to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, out on the beach, and they would work on their machines, and they build all these parts, and they manufacture their own parts. And they finally got it to work on December 17th, 1903. Awesome. And no one was there to watch them do it. They were not a part of the machine that got paid $50,000 like another guy who was a friend of the White House, Mr. Samuel Langley, who was getting paid to come up with a way to do powered flight and had a whole machine around him, had a whole bunch of people sitting in the room, a whole bunch of physicists, a whole bunch of mechanical engineers, people sitting in the room with pencils and the white coats and blah, blah, blah. And here he is up at the hit. And guess what? They didn't do it. And the second the Wright brothers did it and it became well known, you know what he did? He quit. He just said, okay, fine. I take my 50 grand and go home. Well, we don't talk about him because one, he quit. We don't talk about Gustav Whitehead because, who does? We talk about the Wright brothers because the Wright brothers, as far as we know, were the team that got to the finish line and they're the champions. Well, in other sports, there can be people who come in second or third or not get to the finish line, and they can still consider them great players. Like, think about how many baseball players who never won a championship, but they're still considered great baseball players. Ted Williams, Ernie Banks, Tony Gwynn, and we can just keep going on and on and on. Why? Because baseball is a stat-driven sport, yes, but it's also a sport that if you win whether or not you win a championship doesn't seem to speak to your greatness, or even if you win a championship, it doesn't speak to your greatness either.
Because it's empirically a single athlete-driven sport. It's a collective team game, and you know this better than I because you actually played it professionally. But as a fan, it's a star-driven game. It's a singular game. It's only one person at bat, one person pitching. But when you look at football, it's 11 on 11. It's a collective effort on one play. You need all 11 players working collectively for the singular goal of scoring a touchdown, stopping the ball, et cetera, et cetera.
So, and with that being on the table, why is it when, let's say, for instance, let's use coaches for an example for right now. Andy Reid, congratulations. You're now Super Bowl champion coach. Now people say you're a Sherlock for the Hall of Fame, yada, yada, yada. Whereas before, he's a great coach, but. Right? Think about Marv Levy. 4 Super Bowls in a row. Never been done. 4 Super Bowls in a row, but he didn't win any of them. He's a great coach, but. Think about Bud Grant. During the era of all the things that were going on in the NFL back in the 70s, he takes 2 Minnesota Viking teams to the Super Bowl. Didn't win. Great coach, but does anybody even remember the name of coaches of some other teams that won the Super Bowl? And so here's what I'm getting at. So we have this idea that, yes, it's 11 on 11, and yes, we have to work as a unit and all this other things, but so there are positions and players where your future discussion, your history is defined by whether or not you win a championship or not. Matt Ryan, the other Matt Ryan, not this Matt Ryan, the other Matt Ryan, MVP of the league, always talked about one of the best quarterbacks in the league, gone to a Super Bowl. The Pat Riots came back on the last few minutes and won it. And guess what? Now he's like, yeah, he was good, but. Now, it doesn't take away the things that he did, and he can't go out and defend, against, Thomas Brady as he marched, down the field. He's on offense. He's not on defense. And he wasn't the one who Mike Shanahan, who made Kyle Shanahan, who made the call for, instead of running out the clock, decided to go for another touchdown and gave Brady and the Patriots too much more time left on the clock, which is a major sore spot down here, by the way. So he wasn't in those moments that created the environment of which the Falcons lost that Super Bowl. But his history, more so than anyone else, is going to be tied to the fact that, he never won a Super Bowl. So, and think about the other teams who've won a Super Bowl. Like, for instance, you spoke about Brian Billick. So when
in our first episode, yes.
In the first episode. So when the Ravens win the Super Bowl under Brian Billick, how many people do you talk about on that team, and some of which you did already, before you even get to who was the quarterback?
You go through pretty much everybody on the defense. And then you get down to the quarterback, Trent Dilfer, who really was just kind of there in theory. He was there, but if it weren't for that Ravens defense, and I'm not speaking as a Giants fan, if you gave the Ravens an average defense of that time period, if they don't have that first world defense, that nuclear option defense, they had Hiroshima and Nagasaki on one side of the ball, and on the other side, they had the Battle of Atoll. If you take away that defense in the AFC North, which was not a competitive division in the 2000-2001 season, you're looking at the Oakland Raiders maybe going to the Super Bowl that year, maybe even the New England Patriots. And both of those teams, I think, would have lost to that Giant team, which is the more complete team than any other in the league that season. They completely eviscerated the best offensive team in the NFC Championship game, and that being the Minnesota Vikings.
Right.
But
I bet you I can make you laugh.
Oh, please.
I bet you I can make you laugh.
Please do.
Here you go. Brad Johnson was the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens when they won the Super Bowl.
He was. Trent Dilfer was the Buccaneers.
You proved my point. You proved my point. How amazing is this, right? So we have.
I'm just swinging and missing on these the first couple of shows. I'm getting quarterback dates wrong. Trent Dilfer did play for the Ravens, if I'm not wrong. He did play. I think he played.
I am going to check his career right now. I don't think he did, but maybe he was. Yeah, he did. I apologize. You absolutely did. He came in. He signed with them in 2000, become a backup for Tony Banks, and yeah. So yes, he did. You're absolutely right. He sure did.
Yeah, Dilfer was on that Super Bowl team. Dilfer was the quarterback for that team.
The starting quarterback for that.
He was a quarterback. He went 3-0 in the playoffs, and he advanced to Super Bowl 25. It was Trent Dilfer.
You know what? You're absolutely.
Brad Johnson was the Buccaneers. We're flipping the two.
See, and here we go. Boom. There you go. Point for Matt. See, and here's what I'm getting at. You see how we just had to have. We lost 2.5 minutes of our life, and so did our listeners. I was sorry because they were quarterbacks who, though they have Super Bowl rings and though they were in the position that they were in to be on a team, and I'm saying it this way, to be on a team that won a Super Bowl, guess what? You don't hear them discussed in the same language as Dan Marino, who never won one.
Danny White, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Mm-hmm. Danny White, who was the Cowboys quarterback from the mid to late 1970s, had to take over for Roger Staubach. And that was his cross to bear, almost beating Joe Montana in NFC title games, carrying that Cowboys team towards the latter portion of Tom Landry's career, who we'll be speaking about a lot on this show.
Absolutely.
We'll always carry that burden of never winning a Super Bowl. And when you talk about great Cowboys quarterbacks, the first two names you're going to mention are Roger Staubach and Troy Aikman. Danny White and Tony Romo, who I've jostled numerous times throughout the history of my broadcasting career, they're always going to be looked at the lens of never winning a Super Bowl. Romo was never clutch in the playoffs. Danny White gets the same comparison. But when you look at them statistically and empirically as players, they had Hall of Fame worthy careers.
And here is where I'm getting at the goalpost moves because of football more so than any other sport. Look at, in the case of wide receivers, Randy Moss versus Keyshawn Johnson. Now, they are both very gifted, but you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would say that Keyshawn Johnson, who played for my favorite team, which are the
New York Jetropolitans.
Thank you very much. Number 1 draft pick, by the way. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who would say he was a more gifted receiver. As gifted as he wasn't as gifted or more gifted than Randy Moss. Randy Moss completely changed that position and how it's played.
Randy Moss and Vince Carter are the same person to me because, as you said, they redefined the position. Mm-hmm. They brought with themselves the level of intensity, purpose, and skill that only elite players have. The Michael Jordan gene, as it were.
Right.
But due to circumstances beyond their control, they're put in less elite situations for less elite teams during time periods where Vince Carter in his early years still had to contend with a prime Michael Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it was like early in his career, maybe like a season. Then he had to contend with Kobe Bryant in his prime or climbing to his prime. He was playing in an Eastern Conference, which at the time was still a tough nut to crack, playing on what's ostensibly an expansion franchise in the Raptors. You look at Randy Moss in the 1990s. The post-1995 NFC is a crapshoot every single year. you see the dynamic change. You saw the Green Bay Packers won 2 years in a row go to the Super Bowl. But after that, it was the Atlanta Falcons. It was anybody and their uncle getting in on the NFC side. But on the AFC, you started to see the build of the New England Patriots empire. There was more parity in the National Football Conference than there was in the American Football Conference for the majority of Randy Moss's career. So when he's playing in Minnesota, he's really he's competing against so many great teams, and he's got to play Brett Favre twice a year. And then when he goes to Oakland, at the worst time to be an Oakland Raider, especially when further down in his own state, he's got to deal with Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson twice a year. Then he goes to New England, his only shot at a Super Bowl, and it's the Pats versus the Giants.
Right. And it's fun. And you know what, putting it in that perspective, think about, let's just say this way, the bad timing awards, right? Why did his draft stock fall? Because of the legal trouble that he had in school even before he came to the pros. And was some of it warranted? He'd be the first one to tell you that he put himself in bad positions, but he always worked out of it. And even as a player, one of the things, having Chris Carter there to sort of guide him, talk about the king of, like, man, what, if you don't change teams, your life's going to end, kind of a situation. Having a great mentor like Chris Carter there. And one day I'll tell you about a story about watching film with those two guys. The idea of Randy Moss's greatness, he's one of the few that sort of transcend he never won a championship. Dan Marino is one of the few that, even though we hear it said, he transcended. But think about the number of people who played NFL football over the course of NFL football history. So we're talking easily over 25,000 people. And no, that's not a lot. But let's just work from the framework of so many of those people we don't even know. The average NFL career is now 3.5 seasons. So that means the average person who plays in NFL plays 3.5 seasons. So for every Peyton Manning, for every Tom Brady who plays 30 years, for every person who plays multiple decades, there's somebody who signs to a team, dresses out for a game, and then gets cut on the Monday right after. Never gets a chance to play. So think about how it has to work for the people that we know who have these elongated careers, for the average NFL player to only have a 3.5 season career. So, that, with that, the idea of the greatest of the great of the great of the great, think about how long it took Ray Guy. And from our first show, November 9th of 2009, talking about Ray Guy and what he meant to the game and why is he not an NFL? Like they're saying, I'm sorry, Hall of Fame. The same reason for me why Dale Murphy is not in the Hall of Fame. He's a 2-time MVP. Dale Murphy for the Atlanta Braves, 2-time MVP, and should have been probably 3. And he's not in the Hall of Fame. Why is that? What is it? And people bring up, they can't bring up the championship thing for Ray Guy, but for so many people, we move the goalposts of what makes them great and what they need to be great. And I thought about it when I looked at Andy Reid and hearing all the talk about Andy Reid. And I was saying to myself, this guy is an amazing coach. He's an amazing football mind. Why should that ring make that big of a difference for him? And if you know the answer, you can please reach out to us, Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, at one more word pod, man. Just please, because that doesn't take away their greatness when there's other people who have that championship that the first thing people say is, yeah, he was the quarterback, but yes, he was the coach, but why is that? And football is that sport that makes that situation to me, more visible than any other sport. Vinny Testaverde,
Mm.
one of my favorite quarterbacks, and actually one of my favorite people, as rude as he was. And I'm saying that, and I'm not being funny. My first time meeting Vinny Testaverde, he was, oh my goodness, bad sandwich day. I don't know what happens, but that Brooklyn brother had an attitude. Now later he's very cool, very cordial, and I've seen him interact with other people, and he's very nice, and he's a typical Brooklyn dude. I mean, it's what he is, who he is, right? But he's had a career that when he retired, he was sixth in yardage as a passer in NFL. He was seventh in touchdown passes. He was sixth in completions. He even had the most losses at 123. That's a pretty substantial NFL career over, what was it, 13, 14, oh, no, 18 years.
Yeah, he was there from the 87 Bucks until, who knows, 2005?
The Cowboys, I think, was his last franchise.
I believe you're right. Yeah, it was. He was with Parcells.
Right. So here he is with that kind of career, those kind of numbers. He won a Heisman. He won a national championship. He should have won 2 national championships. My goodness, man. It's like all the things that he did, the type of what he represented. He was the guy, big, strong dude. Go back in YouTube, Vinny Testaverde, big, strong dude. Cannon. The football had a tracer round on it. He got a gun for his shoulder. Amazing. But what? He never won a Super Bowl, so he never gets into discussion about his place in history. Curtis Martin, same thing. Finally, Curtis Martin's in the Hall of Fame, and look at his numbers when he retired and where he was even up till now. What he means as an NFL running back. He was just durable. That says a lot. Teams don't draft, very few teams now more than ever draft a running back in the first round. It used to be what happened regularly.
Yeah.
But now they rarely draft a running back in the first round in the NFL because why? We want him to get beat up, and not have to pay him a lot of money. And be easy to get rid of him. So, but here's Curtis Martin. And oh, by the way, imagine what Curtis Martin would have been able to do had he had a passion for football. He was a guy who football was a way to get out the hood, was to not to be chased down by a gang. If you want to hear a story, I will not do it any injustice here. YouTube or search Curtis Martin Hall of Fame speech. And you can listen to him talk about his life, and I'm going to tell you now, prepare yourself, because there's a moment he talks about having a gun put to his head when he was growing up, and what that meant for his life choices. So I'm going to prepare you for that. But talk about a guy who is talented as he was. What that meant for him. What that means for his level of talent to be as good as he was for as long as he was good in the NFL. So imagine if he would have had that same talent, that same transcendent talent, and had a passion for the game. He knew what to do. He had a head for the game, but he didn't have a passion for the game, and had no problem telling you that. He had no problem saying, dude, football was just a way out. Football was just a paycheck. And then after he wasn't playing anymore, he saw how much he impacted other people's lives, and then he gained a passion for it, and that's why he does so much to work with youth football now.
And you bring up Curtis Martin, a fantastic point, and a story that everybody can kind of identify with. And then I look at my Las Vegas Raiders, and there are 2 names that stand out to me outside of Ray Guy. First one is Ken Stabler, who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But he had to wait after being the iconic face of a franchise during the golden era of the NFL in the 1970s. And he had to wait until he was buried to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Super Bowl champion, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, defined a generation, defined what it meant to be a left-handed quarterback.
Exactly.
And had to be inducted posthumously. And then there's another Oakland Raider, or another Las Vegas Raider, pardon me, George Blanda.
Yeah.
When you talk about George Blanda, this is a man who lived 87 lives. He played under Papa Bear Harris. He played under, he played for Bud Adams in Houston, and he played under Al Davis in Oakland. He was an AFL champion. He played on some of the great Raider teams of the 1960s and 70s, played in Super Bowl II, not in the Hall of Fame, which to me is an unconscionable thing. And then you look throughout different portions of history. If you look at the people in the AFL, when you look at the different AFL legends that do not get recognized.
Right.
And we really need to, and that's one of the things we're going to be talking about on this show throughout the next infinite number of weeks. It's not just going to be about kickoff returns or yak or whack or whatever. It's going to be the people, the moments, and the themes of pro football history. And when you look at pro football within a lens, why isn't Joe Foss in the Pro Football Hall of Fame?
Right.
The original commissioner of the American Football League, was a war hero, was I believe a senator from North Dakota, and he was chosen by Lamar Hunt to be the commissioner of the American Football League. Why aren't more of these players like the original front seven of the Kansas City Chiefs?
Oh my goodness! It's dude, you're scratching the scab because because the reality of what we're looking at, and let's just say the words here on One More Word Pod. The reality of what we're looking at is, yes, there is a political dynamic in terms of who gets celebrated, who gets talked about, who gets placed. We understand that part. We have no problem with that. As a matter of fact, I would even respect it more if those people who, let's say, for instance, who vote on who gets to the Hall of Fame. We talk about this with baseball a lot, right? Mm. Who decided that, who voted against Ricky Henderson? Like who decided, oh, no, yeah. There's always that one, there's always that one, contentious vote of like, no, you're not going to get a unanimous because of if Babe Ruth didn't get in unanimously, no one should get in unanimously. And then they just put in Derek Jeter unanimously.
Who doesn't vote Babe Ruth? Like, that's the interesting thing to me. Mariano Rivera was the first player to ever unanimously be voted into the Pro Baseball Hall of Fame. Hall of Fame.
Thank you. That's who I was thinking of.
No, but Derek Jeter got all but one. Right. But when we look at this, who's not voting for Ted Williams or Mickey Mantle or Roger Maris, Rogers Hornsby?
Thank you.
Also,
wait.
To the people that did not vote Tom Seaver in unanimously as into the Baseball Hall of Fame or Nolan Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you?
And again, there is that political aspect. We all know it's there. And if you didn't vote for them and came out and said, well, I didn't vote for him because you know what? I just didn't like the guy. Okay, fine. At least you said it. Now, you know what? Give me your vote. Give me your vote. Because, and oh, by the way, to hide behind anonymity and do it is even worse because you're speaking to what is the one thing sports writers always talk about? Transparency. Mm-hmm. Know what's going on. Let the fans inside. That's why we do what we do. But then when they vote, they do that secret squirrel stuff, right? It's like, nah, bro, I'm sorry. I need to take that vote from you now. And
I'm looking at my bookshelf right now, and I'm looking at books about Walter O'Malley, Connie Mack, Gil Hodges, Paul Hornung, and going across different sports, all books I still need to read. I've got like 800 books in my library. And to think about the fact that these guys either weren't voted into a Hall of Fame or weren't voted in unanimously irks me.
And granted, not everybody can be in a Hall of Fame. No. We get that. We get that. Understood. Absolutely. Because it's supposed to be the best of the best of the best of the best of the best. So, let's see here. We talked about every year in the NFL, every Sunday has 1,356 players because there's 53 guys on the roster and there's 32 teams. So 1,356 players every week dress up Now, it might be a different 1,356 players the next week, but it's still every week. So every week there's been NFL with a 53-man roster. That's how many cats suit up. So that's still a super, super, super small percentage of people who played football at all on any level, right? So the Hall of Fame should be where no brainer. You say the name. I always love that argument. You say the name, it's yes or no, and you shouldn't have to have a debate about numbers. You shouldn't say Ken Griffey Jr. Well, no, yeah. You shouldn't say Ray Guy. No, yeah. If
Here's
indeed,
a controversial one: Eli Manning.
there you go. So, question asking you as a Giants fan. I know it's unfair. Do you think that he has had a career that would put him in the Hall of Fame?
You know what? I do.
Okay.
Playing in the most talent-rich era, the era that has had the most parity in NFL history. If you look at the past 17 seasons that Eli Manning played, you can look at this era of saying this has had the most parity of any era in the National Football League, with or without free agency.
Mm-hmm.
And for him to be the quarterback of a team that made the playoffs inconsistently, but even though he's got a 500 record as a starter, for him to go to 2 Super Bowls in his career and win 2 Super Bowls and have impressive statistics within this era, because we can't look at the Hall of Fame, any Hall of Fame, under the same criteria.
Boom.
Much like the Constitution, it's a living, breathing document and a living, breathing list of empirical assets that a player must have.
Agreed.
Because if you're comparing let's just go all the way back to, a Y.A. Tittle, or if you want to go even further back.
Crazy Legs Hirsch.
Crazy Legs Hirsch. One thing we did on this show a million years ago is we put together the all-decade team for each decade. And we tried to figure out which decade was the best decade. You can't, and we might be doing that again on this podcast.
We got to do it again.
I'll get a new copy of Madden and I'll build it out. It'll take me a few weeks, but I'll do it. But when you're looking at, the Chicago Bears of the 1920s, or if you're looking at the Green Bay Packers of the 2010s, Eli Manning winning those 2 Super Bowls when he's had to contend in the NFC against Drew Brees, against Aaron Rodgers, when he had to play the greatest quarterback of modern time, Tom Brady, twice. Mm-hmm. And he beat him twice. You really have to consider that as a part of his overall resume, because that is a level of greatness that not many athletes can aspire to.
Thank you for saying resume. Thank you for saying resume. Thank you for saying resume, because you have to.
It's the body of work. It's the body of work. It is within the time frame that athlete played, and it's within the constraints of what that athlete had to play to. If Babe Ruth had to compete against Buck Leonard every year for the AL batting title, we may be having a different conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And who was the greatest player Babe Ruth ever said? Who was the greatest player almost anybody from Babe Ruth to Ty Cobb ever talked about, they ever watched, was actually a Negro League player. Mm-hmm. So, when people talk about Josh Gibson finally getting signed and never been able to make to his, the reality of when you play matters, yes. And also the element of, I think for some, I'm going to use the quarterback that represents my franchise more so than any other person that's associated with a franchise, Joe Namath. You look at his statistics, not so much. But you look at what he means to the game. Super Bowl III, which we're going to talk about.
He's the reason for the merger.
He's a reason for the merger. He's a reason that free agency took the turn that it took. He's the reason that there are so many things that he's the reason for, and you know this. People look at Joe Namath now as the guy who was slightly inebriated, asking Bonnie Bernstein, "Yeah, I like to kiss you."
It
People,
was Susie. It was Susie Colbert.
thank you, apologize, Susie Colbert. Yes. So people, people look at him, and
I
yes, in some cases he's sort of like the punchline now.
I
The
think
great
I think that's changed. To be honest with you, I
and
think
and
he's reclaimed some of his legacy back.
and yes, and that actually is supposed. See, here's how I know we've been married too long. You stole it right out my throat because of the fact that he was able to survive that in the world of social media, where that was flying everywhere. Where now he's come back to this respected voice. He's now a voice for the NFL again. He is what Johnny Unitas unfortunately was too bitter to be at the end of his life,
Mm-hmm.
because for those who might not know, Johnny Unitas did not make any appearances when they got back every Super Bowl winning quarterback and every Hall of Fame quarterback back to these major events. He never went because he felt like he wasn't getting, for his likeness being used the way it was being used, he felt like he wasn't getting his a prospective amount of his pension.
Mm.
And so he was out doing autographs, selling merchandise, doing the
He
whole
went the
nine.
Pete Rose route.
Exactly. So, and what was really well, and here we go. Instead of and we've had this conversation before, instead of making that reach out to a guy like that who you use his likeness every single time you talk about the greatest quarterbacks ever, his name comes up, the video clips come up, the this, that come up, whatever. Even in the loss to the Jets in Super Bowl III, when he came in and he filled in for Earl Morrall, right? Him on his knees at the end of the game, dripped in mud. That's still a heroic moment, because guess what? Every person who was there say the exact same thing. If he would have been in the game sooner, the Colts would have won that Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone says, I mean, the fear that even at that point, as broken as he was, as aged as he might have been, whatever you want to say about it, even at that moment, he still had the gift to strike fear into the opponent. And that is something that, can never be overlooked. And the fact that here he was basically scrapping for a living toward the end of his life, when the league had more than enough capital to say, you know what, let's redo these guys' pension plan. Because we drag up NFL films all the time. We're showing these old games all the time. We're doing all that. Why not give those cats at least a piece of that with their likenesses and stuff being used? It wasn't going to hurt them. If anything, it would have been ingratiated a lot more of those players from that era who didn't have the financial boom that occurred for the NFL in the 80s. So, it is as heartbreaking as it might be. Yes, there is a political side to it. Yes, there's an economic side to it. There's a reason that we talk about these guys who transcend the sport and are talked about in Hall of Fame conversations, but there are some that the resume doesn't work, but their meaning to the game does, like a Joe Namath.
Mm-hmm.
And
but you need to list that stuff on their resume. You can't look past it. If
right.
You're looking at the resume of a player, you can't just, and we go around the stats here. We don't break down touchdowns against interceptions.
Yeah.
If it did, we would be boring, and we would not be talking about Earl Morrall in the year of our Lord 2020. When you look at a player's entire career, and if it was a Hall of Fame worthy career or not, you need to look at good and bad, obviously. But if their contributions to the sport outweigh that of anyone else's career, or a significant portion of their career outstretches anyone in terms of impact and relevance, you need to put them in the Hall of Fame.
And that's why we can't keep moving the goalposts. We can't keep saying, oh, championships matter. And then for some people say, well, no, for him or for her, it doesn't matter. We granted that there might be some, how can we say this, circuitous routes to the Hall of Fame, but a person is either a Hall of Fame worthy athlete because of what they did on the field, what they mean off the field, what they represent, whatever, or if you have to say, like, okay, you said, I think so. You gave us a reason for Eli Manning. I'll tell you from my perspective, yeah, from the conversation that I've heard, yeah, I'm not a fan of Eli Manning. I on it, you know this, but I can still in appreciation for what he did over the time frame he did it and when he did it, say that yes, he does represent one of the strongest pieces of that league, even in those moments that I would say, yes, I could cast my vote for him. And oh, by the way, for our new listeners, we thank you so much. We thank you so much for hanging out with us and listening to us on this. I'm going to say this right now. We don't do Mount Rushmores.
No.
We don't say, we don't do, Mount Rushmore or Saskatchewan cricket. We're not doing that.
We will have continuous coverage of the Canadian Curling League.
And why should we not? Because what? Greatest sport ever. I'm just going to say it. I said it. You can't take it back. So, but it is like, I look at players who came in with such great promise and how their history gets rewritten. But again, and I say this because I think of Andy, of all the coaches I've seen in terms of as people, like who I'd want, I mean, as much as I respect Bill Parcells, I'm not going to a steak dinner with Bill Parcells. As much as I respect him in terms of football, there is nothing that I would want to talk to him about. But Andy Reid, I'd hang with Andy Reid. Tom Coughlin, I will hang with some Tom Coughlin.
Yeah,
the dude is funny, he's smart, and he can talk about a lot of stuff other than football. And, there are people out there that I see that I can respect them for what they do, and also see in how, whether I've met them or not, see how much I can like them away from the sport. And quite frankly, Andy Reid is one of those coaches that I have, even when he was with the Eagles, Matthew, I pulled for Andy Reid. I pulled for Andy Reid. I might not have pulled for anybody. I might not have pulled for anybody else on that team. I couldn't.
But Donovan McNabb, though.
You know what? You're right. Yeah. Okay. So him. So Andy Reid, 0.5. Andy Reid and half of Donovan McNabb. But other than that, not so much. So
here's an interesting way we can view this. Marvin, you may know a thing or two about music.
Maybe.
But how about we view things under the Lou Reed principle?
Okay.
Lou Reed. Greatest singer of all time? No. Greatest guitar player of all time? Most certainly not. Did he ruin a Metallica album? Possibly. But can you deny the impact of a Lou Reed? Can you deny that the Velvet Underground created an entire genre of music? Can you deny that A Perfect Day is not a beautiful song that you can listen to at any time of day, any time of year?
Absolutely. You can't. Hey, you can take this a gazillion ways. Think about David Bowie, for crying out loud. Think about David Bowie. If he came to audition for your band, he would probably get 2 words out and you go, "Thank you, please go." But what he represents to music is something bigger than that. And it's so funny. I was thinking about, been married too long. I was thinking about the Stones tune, "Please allow me to introduce myself." I was thinking about that when I was getting ready for this show today. I should say I was recording today, and I was thinking about that, going like, you know what? As a musical thing, it's like, yeah, but the energy and what they mean and what the songs they wrote and how they presented it, that's huge. That's huge. Were there, I'm going to put sarcastic quotes in the air that I can't do well, better musical bands around? Yeah, but who cares?
Yeah.
Because why? We like those guys. It's just the way it is. So that's a great point. People can be recognized for what they are without the technical prowess and technical proficiency that the wins and losses, yardage, touchdowns, all of those stuff can be. And if they are indeed that great, it should be no question. The answer is yes or no, and what that means. And so as we talk about more Hall of Fame stuff in the future, again, major shout out to Coach Andy Reid. I'm so glad you got that ring, and now you're finally a decent coach. So well done, you big guy.
You and who was the coach of that Colts team that won at Super Bowl V? Who was it? Exactly. That's the point.
So unfair, but so doggone true. Oh my goodness. See, see, now I want to know who it was because you said it. And you know what? What's really sad? I forgot the Colts won Super Bowl V. You know why? Because I'm still living off of Super Bowl III. 190 years ago. How sad is that, right?
You know who performed the halftime show at Super Bowl V?
Let me guess. It wasn't Janet Jackson.
It was not Janet Jackson.
Okay. Oh my goodness gracious! The Southeast Missouri State College Marching Eagles Band with Anita Bryant. Oh my Lord!
George Young was the assistant coach for that team.
Oh wow. And they beat the Cowboys.
Yep. And it's the first Super Bowl ever played on artificial turf.
Don McCafferty was the head coach, and I should know that because I have his autographed playbook. I don't. I'm being facetious here because when I think of Super Bowl winning coaches, I don't think of him, nor do I think of Brian Billick. So there we go.
And he beat Tom Landry.
So Tom, you lost again, dude. No, I'm sorry, that's unfair, but he did. And so when we go back in our Super Bowl episodes, we are going to talk about that, like coaches like Tom Landry. He wins 2 Super Bowls, he loses 2 to the Steelers, 1 to the Jets, 1 to the Colts. So
he didn't lose to the Jets. Landry didn't lose to the Jets. Shula lost to the Jets.
Shula. Yeah, well, they look alike. So I was being funny. Please save all your messages of racial hate for somebody else. But but isn't it maddening that John Elway, right? And again, we'll leave on this point. John Elway, how many Super Bowls did he win?
2.
How many did he lose?
2.
Sounds right. I thought it was 3.
Well, he lost at least 1.
He lost at least 1. Well,
no, he lost to the Giants in '86, and then he lost to the Redskins.
Right. So think about how they were talking about his career. Again, like Marino, right? He was one of these cats who considered the greatest.
Actually, no, they lost 3.
I thought he lost 3.
Redskins and the Niners. I'm sorry.
Exactly. I thought he lost 3. So his record in the Super Bowl is 2-3. But we still don't discuss how weakened his status is. But yet and still, when Tom Brady, after winning 5 or after winning 4 and not winning another, they were, again, we can't move the goalposts when it comes to championships. And that's what we're trying to do here on One More Word Pod. We try to keep it straight down the middle, just like a Rodrigo Blankenship kick from the University of Georgia, who did not get drafted today. I'm going to almost start a whole nother episode of how can you not pick the greatest kicker in college football here, but that's neither here nor there, because we are One More Word Pod. I'm Marvin Williams, not that Marvin Williams, the other Marvin Williams, and it's Matthew Aloysius, Octavius, Orenthal, Gerard, Ryan, the 3rd, the 4th, and a half, and the 5th. In New York, we're social distancing. He's in New York, I'm in Savannah. And you can find us at One More Word Pod at Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, YouTube. Please stay safe. Please stay with the people you need to be with and no one else. And that didn't come out right. And thank you for taking time out of your day in your life to take a listen to us. And we're going to have more for you coming up real soon. Thank you again. One More Word Pod.